Let me ask you something. When was the last time you actually changed corporate behavior with your wallet? Not just posted about it, not just retweeted something, actually made a company feel pain. For most people, the answer is never. And that is by design. Because the system wants you to think you are powerless. They want you to believe that your individual choices do not matter. That companies are too big to fail, too powerful to touch. But history tells a different story. History shows us that when regular people decide to stop buying, corporations panic, governments fall, systems change. They call it a boycott. And when done right, it is one of the most powerful weapons you have against a rigged system. But here's the problem. Most boycotts fail. They fizzle out after a week. They get forgotten when the next trend hits. People post about it for 3 days, then go right back to buying the same garbage, from the same companies doing the same evil things. So what separates a boycott that actually works from one that is just performative nonsense? What makes corporations actually change versus just waiting for you to forget? That is what we are breaking down today. The brutal truth about boycotts, when they work, when they fail, and how you can actually use your money as a weapon instead of just complaining on the internet. Now, before we go any further, if you want to understand how economic power really works and how regular people can fight back against corporate greed, hit that subscribe button right now. We are Money Trap Family. We break down the financial realities that nobody else wants to talk about. No fluff, no corporate propaganda. Just the raw truth about money, power, and how the game is actually played. Subscribe and turn on notifications because this information could change how you see every purchase you make. Literally. Alright, let me start with what a boycott actually is. Because a lot of people throw the word around without understanding what they are talking about. A boycott is when consumers consciously refuse to buy products or services from a specific company, to force that company to change its behavior. It is economic warfare, pure and simple. You are weaponizing your purchasing power. You are saying this company did something so wrong that I will not give them another dollar until they fix it. And if enough people do that, the company bleeds. Their cash flow collapses, their stock drops, their reputation crumbles, and suddenly they are begging to negotiate. But here is what most people do not understand. A boycott is not just not buying something. That is just you being broke or lazy. A real boycott is organized. It is strategic. It has specific demands. It communicates those demands publicly. It mobilizes masses of people. It sustains pressure over time. Without those elements, you are not boycotting. You are just not shopping. And companies do not care if you personally stop buying their stuff. They care when thousands or millions of people do it together with a clear message about why. Now let me tell you where this word even comes from, because it is actually a pretty wild story. Back in the 1880s, there was this British land agent in Ireland named Charles Boycott. This guy was a complete tyrant. He worked for a wealthy landowner, and his job was to collect rent from Irish tenant farmers. And when they could not pay, he evicted them violently. No mercy, no exceptions. Just throw entire families out on the street. This was during a time when Ireland was already suffering. Crops were failing. People were starving. And this man was making it worse by demanding money they did not have and destroying their lives when they could not pay. So the Irish Land League, a resistance movement fighting for farmers' rights, decided to make an example of him. They organized the entire community to completely isolate Charles Boycott. Workers refused to work his land. Shops refused to serve him. The mailman would not deliver his mail. Nobody would talk to him. He became a ghost in his own community. And eventually, the pressure was so intense that he fled Ireland completely. The campaign was so successful that his name became the word we use for this tactic, boycott. One man's name turned into a verb that describes collective resistance. That is how powerful this strategy can be when done right. The boycotts are way older than Charles' boycott. Ancient civilizations used this tactic. In ancient Rome, common people would leave the city en masse to protest decisions made by the ruling class. They would just abandon Rome entirely until the rulers negotiated. That is a boycott. American colonists boycotted British tea before the Revolution. They were being taxed without representation, so they stopped buying British products. That boycott helped spark a war that created a new country. This is not some modern social media thing. This is an ancient weapon that regular people have used throughout history to fight back against power. Now let me talk about when boycotts actually work, because this is where it gets interesting. History shows us that successful boycotts have 4 critical elements. Miss even one of these, and your boycott is probably going to fail. First, you need a clear goal. Not some vague, "we want them to be better" nonsense. A specific, measurable demand. The Montgomery Bus Boycott in the 1950s had a clear goal. Black people in Alabama refused to ride segregated buses until the law changed. Simple, clear, non-negotiable. They were not asking for buses to be nicer. They were demanding an end to segregation. Period. That clarity is what kept people committed for over a year. Compare that to most modern boycotts where people are mad about something but cannot articulate exactly what they want the company to do. That does not work. Companies can just wait you out. They know if your demands are vague, you will eventually forget why you were even mad. But when your goal is crystal clear, when you can measure whether they met it or not, that is when they have to respond. Because you are not going away until they do the specific thing you demanded. Second element, you need awareness and education. People need to know the boycott is happening and understand why it matters. The United Farm Workers grape boycott in the 1960s is the perfect example. Farm workers in California were being treated like slaves. Terrible wages, dangerous working conditions, exposure to toxic pesticides. So they called for a boycott of grapes. But they did not just announce it and hope people cared. They went to grocery stores and handed out flyers. They held press conferences. They did interviews. They put on plays to educate people about what farm workers were experiencing. They made it impossible to ignore, and it worked. Millions of Americans stopped eating grapes for 3 years, not 3 days, not 3 weeks, 3 years. Grape sales dropped by double digits. The industry lost hundreds of millions in today's dollars. And eventually, the growers had to negotiate. The farm workers won better wages, health care, and safety protections. They even got toxic pesticides banned. All because they educated people about why the boycott mattered and kept that message alive for years. That is the power of sustained awareness. Third element, consistent mobilization. This is where most modern boycotts fail. People get excited for a week, then move on to the next outrage. But real change requires long-term commitment. The Montgomery Bus Boycott lasted 381 days. Over a year, Black residents of Montgomery had to find other ways to get to work, to school, to church every single day for over a year. That is not easy. Public transportation was how most people got around, but they organized carpools. They walked. They helped each other. They built a mutual aid network that sustained the boycott until they won. Think about that. Over a year of collective sacrifice for a clear goal. That is what it takes. Not posting about it for 3 days, then forgetting. Not buying the product once, then going back because it is convenient. Real sustained pressure over time. And here is the thing. Companies know this. They know most boycotts fizzle out fast. So their strategy is simple. Weather the storm. Issue a meaningless apology. Wait for people to forget. Then go right back to doing the same thing. The only way to beat that strategy is to not forget. To keep the pressure on until they actually change. Fourth element, economic impact. This is the most important one. You have to actually hurt their bottom line. A boycott that does not affect profits is just theater. In 1989, after the Exxon oil spill in Alaska, environmental groups called for a boycott of Exxon gas stations. Thousands of people participated, but it barely made a dent in their profits. Why? Because most Exxon stations were independently owned. So the boycott hurt small business owners, not Exxon corporate. That is a failed boycott. The target was wrong. Or look at the Facebook boycotts after the Cambridge Analytica scandal. People deleted their accounts to protest Facebook harvesting private data. But Facebook's revenue barely moved. Why? Because people did not realize Facebook also owns Instagram and WhatsApp. They were still using Facebook products without knowing it. And even if they did know, Facebook's real money comes from advertisers, not users. So individual users deleting accounts does not hurt them. That is another failed boycott. Wrong strategy. Successful boycotts hit companies where it actually hurts. The grape boycott worked because grapes were the product. You stop buying grapes, the grape industry loses money directly. Simple, clear, effective. The Montgomery Bus Boycott worked because the bus company lost massive revenue when black riders stopped using buses. They had to change or go bankrupt. That is economic impact. That is what forces change. Now let me talk about the middle class and why it matters. Because this is critical to understanding modern boycotts. Companies that sell to regular consumers, especially middle-class consumers, are the most vulnerable to boycotts. Why? Because the middle class is huge. It is the biggest consumer base in any developed country. And middle-class spending is what keeps most retail companies alive. When the middle class organizes a boycott, companies panic, not because each individual matters, but because collectively, the middle class controls the majority of consumer spending. This is why companies spend billions on marketing to the middle class. This is why they carefully craft their brand image to appeal to middle class values. Because losing middle class support means losing the majority of their revenue. A luxury brand that only sells to rich people. They do not care if you boycott them. You are not their customer anyway. A brand that sells cheap stuff to poor people. They might survive a boycott because poor people have fewer alternatives. But a brand that depends on middle-class consumers, they are screwed if the middle class turns on them. That is their whole market. And here is something else people do not talk about. The middle class also controls cultural influence. Artists, writers, academics, professionals, these people shape public opinion. When the middle class decides something is unacceptable, that message spreads. It becomes the cultural consensus. Companies know this. They know losing middle class support does not just hurt sales today. It destroys their brand reputation for years. That is why middle class boycotts are so powerful. It is not just about the money. It is about the cultural statement. Now let me address the biggest myth about boycotts. The idea that companies are too big to boycott. That they have too many products, too much money, too much power. That is corporate propaganda. Here is the truth. No company is invincible. Every company needs cash flow. Every company has shareholders to answer to. Every company has competitors waiting to take their market share. And when a boycott is done right, it exposes all of those vulnerabilities. Think about it like this. When you boycott a company, that money does not just disappear. It goes to their competitors. If people stop buying Coca-Cola, they start buying Pepsi, or local brands, or they just drink water. Either way, Coca-Cola loses and someone else wins. That is the beauty of capitalism from a consumer perspective. There is always an alternative. Always. Even in industries with only a few major players, there are smaller companies desperate for your business. Your boycott helps them grow while shrinking the company you are targeting. And companies know this. They know a successful boycott does not just hurt them financially. It helps their competitors. It shifts market share permanently. That is why they fight so hard against boycotts. Not because boycotts are weak, because boycotts work when done correctly. The system wants you to think you are powerless, because if you realized your collective economic power, you would be terrifying. Now let me talk about why modern boycotts often fail. Social media made it easy to call for boycotts. Too easy. Now every week there is a new boycott trending. And that creates boycott fatigue. People see so many calls to boycott so many companies for so many reasons that they just tune it all out. Nothing feels important when everything is supposedly urgent. That is the problem with social media activism. It values virality over effectiveness. People would rather post about a boycott for clout than actually participate in it. Another problem is lack of organization. Old boycotts had leaders. They had structure. They had clear communication channels. The Montgomery Bus Boycott had the Montgomery Improvement Association led by Martin Luther King Jr. The Grape Boycott had the United Farm Workers led by Cesar Chavez. These were organized movements with strategies and resources. Modern social media boycotts? They are just hashtags. No leadership, no strategy, no follow-through. Just a bunch of individuals doing whatever they feel like with no coordination. That does not work. And then there is the convenience problem. Let me be honest with you. Most people are not willing to sacrifice convenience for their principles. They will post about a boycott. They will shame others for not participating. But when it comes time to actually change their own behavior, they find excuses. It is too hard. There are no good alternatives. One purchase does not matter. They promise to do better next time. This is why companies do not fear social media boycotts. They know most of that energy is performative. People will forget in a week and go right back to being customers. But here's what gives me hope. When boycotts are organized correctly, when people are educated about why it matters, when the goal is clear and the economic impact is real, they still work. Look at what happened with Starbucks recently. When they took anti-union stances and made statements people disagreed with, organized boycotts hit them hard. Their stock dropped billions in value. Actual billions. That is not nothing. That is real economic damage that forced them to respond. Not perfectly. But they had to acknowledge the pressure. That is what a real boycott looks like. Or, look at how quickly companies change their tune when advertisers start pulling out. Because that is just another form of boycott. When advertisers threaten to take their money elsewhere, companies panic and make changes immediately. Why? Economic impact. Follow the money and you find what actually motivates change. Everything else is just noise. So what does all this mean for you? How do you actually participate in effective boycotts? First, be selective. You cannot boycott everything. Pick the battles that matter most to you and commit to those. Do not spread yourself so thin that you are not really boycotting anything. Second, understand the goal. Know exactly what you want the company to change. If you cannot articulate a specific demand, you are not ready to boycott. Third, find alternatives. Research what you will buy instead. Make it easy on yourself to sustain the boycott long term. If there are no good alternatives, maybe this is not the right target. Fourth, spread awareness. Tell people why you are boycotting. Share information. Educate others. The more people who understand and participate, the more effective the boycott becomes. Fifth, be patient. Real change takes time, months, sometimes years. If you are not willing to commit for the long haul, do not bother starting. And finally, hold companies accountable when they do change. If they meet your demands, acknowledge it. Reward good behavior just like you punish bad behavior. That is how you train corporations. Look, boycotts are not perfect. They are not a magic solution to every problem. Sometimes they fail even when everything is done right. Sometimes companies are just too big or too diversified to really hurt. Sometimes the issue is too complex to solve with consumer pressure alone. But boycotts are one tool in the toolbox. Used correctly, they can create real change. They can force companies to treat workers better, to stop destroying the environment, to take stances on social issues, to be accountable to something other than just profit. The key is understanding that a boycott is not just about you. It is about collective action. It is about masses of people deciding together that something is unacceptable. That is when change happens. Not when individuals quietly stop buying things, but when communities organize and say, "We are done funding your bad behavior." That message, backed by sustained economic pressure, is something companies have to respond to. Because at the end of the day, companies need your money more than you need their products. The system wants you to think you are powerless, that your choices do not matter, that corporations are too big to care about individuals. But history proves otherwise. From Charles Boycott getting driven out of Ireland to the Montgomery buses, getting desegregated to farm workers winning rights through the grape boycott, regular people have used economic pressure to force powerful entities to change. Not because those entities wanted to change, because they had no choice. The money dried up. The pressure was too intense. They had to bend or break. So the next time you see a call to boycott, ask yourself the 4 questions. Is the goal clear? Is there a plan for awareness and education? Can we sustain this long term? Will this actually hurt their profits? If the answer to all 4 is yes, that boycott has a chance. If the answer to any is no, it is probably just performative nonsense that will fade in a week. Choose your battles wisely. Commit fully when you choose to fight. And remember, companies only have as much power as you give them through your purchases. Take that power back. The financial system is rigged. Corporations have too much control. But you are not as powerless as they want you to believe. Your wallet is a weapon. Use it strategically. Use it collectively. And use it to demand the world you actually want to live in, not the world they are trying to sell you. If you found this valuable, make sure you watch the video coming up next on your screen. We are going even deeper into how economic systems actually work and how regular people can fight back. This is Money Trap Channel. We give you the truth without the propaganda. Stay disciplined, stay focused, and remember, your money is your voice. Make it count.